Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Tonight, we are stepping back into the grandeur and the grim realities of ancient Rome to talk about a group of women who held incredible power, were revered like goddesses, and yet lived with a constant, terrifying threat hanging over their heads. The Vestal virgins. Trust me, being a real Vestal was nothing like the movies, unless the movie was about intense religious pressure, terrifying superstitions, and the absolute worst way to go out if you messed up. So before we dive into this one, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, what time it is, and maybe one thing you think is absolutely insane that people used to believe. Now get ready for a journey, because tonight we are easing into history together, into its strange and sometimes unsettling depths. Imagine being plucked from your world. One day you're a child, maybe playing with dolls made of clay or running through the family atrium. The sounds of your siblings and servants a constant, comforting hum. Your future feels open, filled with the vague, bright possibilities of marriage, children, a home of your own. The next you are chosen, selected, set apart. The internal conflict must have been a silent scream. All the natural urges, the blossoming curiosity about boys, the simple desire for touch, for affection beyond the formal, for the messy, unpredictable stuff of human connection, all of it slammed shut, forbidden. You're a child still, really, maybe barely old enough to understand fully what virginity means in this context, only that it's tied to something terrifyingly important, something about fire and Rome's safety. Your own body, once just yours, becomes a public trust, a sacred vessel. How do you reconcile the giggling, curious child you were with this silent, watchful, pure being you must now present? It's a constant internal performance, a suppression that must feel like holding your breath for decades. Every natural impulse, every secret thought, potentially a sin. The shift from childhood isn't gradual, it's violent. The world shrinks. No more running freely. No more whispered secrets with friends about silly things. Your companions are now other Vestals, bound by the same impossible rules, overseen by older women who have perhaps mastered this suppression, or perhaps are just better at hiding the cost. Your family visits are restricted, formal. You are literally removed from the embrace of your mother, the rough play with your father or brothers. You are elevated, yes, given status and privilege, but at the cost of everything normal, everything childhood is built on. The marble floors feel cold underfoot, the sacred silence heavy after the comfortable noise of home. The fine tunics, while beautiful, are the uniform of your new, restrictive life. You are adorned, but also contained. And the fear. Oh, the fear. It must be a constant, cold knot in your stomach. Failure isn't just disappointment, it's death. Not quick death, but the horror of being buried alive, a symbolic return to the earth because you defiled the sacred fire, the sacred city, with your impurity. Every glance from a man, every passing thought, every small mistake in ritual, could it be interpreted? Are you being watched? The Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, holds absolute power over you. His judgment is final. The pressure to be perfect isn't external. It's an internal cage forged from terror. How do you sleep, knowing one accusation, true or false, could seal your fate? This isn't abstract fear, it's visceral. The imagined feel of the soil, the suffocating darkness, the slow realization that no one is coming. This fear must color every interaction, every moment of solitude, every time the sacred fire flickers. It's a terror you can never truly escape, a silent predator always at the edge of your vision. Now zoom out a little. Why were these women, these chosen few, so profoundly important to the fabric of Roman society? Well, you weren't just guarding a bonfire, you were safeguarding the very soul of Rome itself. The eternal flame in the temple of Vesta wasn't just symbolic. Romans genuinely believed its presence was intrinsically linked to the city's fortunes, its safety, its dominance. If the fire went out, it was an omen of disaster so terrible it could make battle defeats look like a minor inconvenience. Think famine, plague, invasion, the absolute worst-case scenarios for a civilization built on order and divine favor. And who was responsible for keeping that fiery heartbeat alive day and night for centuries? You were. Your daily life, despite the immense pressure and sacred status, was a strange blend of the sublime and the surprisingly mundane. You'd wake in your simple cell within the lavish atrium vesti, surrounded by marble and greenery that felt less like home and more like a very fancy prison. Your primary duty, the core of your existence, was tending that flame. Imagine the monotony, the sheer vigilance required. Every day, for 10 years of active service, you'd feed it, watch it, ensure it never even flickered towards death. It's less about grand miracles and more about the relentless, exhausting reality of keeping a fire going without modern tools, relying on sheer attentiveness and access to the right kind of wood. Beyond the fire, your tasks included fetching water from the sacred spring of Egeria, a specific, ritualistic journey often made publicly, a visible demonstration of your purity and service. You'd also prepare the mola salsa, a sacred mixture of salted flour used in nearly every official Roman sacrifice. Think about that. You, a young woman bound by an impossible vow, were responsible for creating a fundamental component of Rome's religious connection to the gods. The feel of the coarse flour, the sting of salt, the rhythmic grinding, these tactile experiences were woven into the divine fabric of the city. It elevates the domestic to the cosmic, a bizarre fusion of housewife chores and imperial destiny. This wasn't a temporary gig, either. Your commitment was for 30 years, 10 years as a novice learning the ancient, intricate rituals, 10 years actively performing your duties, and a final 10 years teaching the next generation of frightened girls who would arrive, wide-eyed and trembling. Only after those 3 decades could you, in theory, retire and even marry, receiving a generous dowry from the state. But 30 years is a lifetime when you're trapped by a vow of perfect, unnatural chastity, under constant scrutiny, with the fate of Rome and your own horrifying end hanging in the balance should you stumble. That 30-year clock was a countdown, not just to potential freedom, but to the ever-present possibility of disaster and accusation. And sometimes, despite the terror, despite the piety, despite the sheer impossibility of it all, the unthinkable happened. The sacred vow was broken, or accused of being broken, and in that unsettling stillness, something truly stark began to stir. Something that would reveal the chilling cost of Rome's obsession with divine purity. But one day the air changes. It doesn't happen with a shout or a public declaration, not at first. It starts subtly, like a whisper carried on the Roman wind, or a glance held a moment too long. Suspicion. It's the silent killer in your world, more insidious than any barbarian invasion. Imagine that feeling settling over you. Suddenly, the easy camaraderie with a fellow Vestal feels strained. Conversations grow guarded. Every interaction outside the atrium, every necessary trip into the city to fetch water or perform a public ritual, is now fraught with anxiety. Are people looking at you differently? Is that murmuring about you? The weight of the city's gaze, which was once a source of immense respect and privilege, now feels like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at your skin. Your movements become more careful, your smiles more practiced, your public piety just a little bit more performative, because the stakes are no longer just about ritual perfection. They're about survival. This constant self-monitoring, this internal censor, must have been utterly exhausting, a relentless psychological siege. And who wielded this terrifying power of suspicion and accusation? The Pontifex Maximus. Think of him as the Pope, the head of the state religion, and the chief judge all rolled into one terrifyingly powerful figure. He wasn't just a priest. He was a magistrate with absolute authority over the Vestals. Your very life rested on his judgment, a judgment that could be influenced by pure religious belief, political maneuvering, or even personal vendettas. Accusations often came from outside, disgruntled former lovers of men. A Vestal was allegedly involved with political enemies of her family, or even citizens simply looking for a scapegoat when things went wrong in the city. Remember, if the fire went out, or Rome suffered a defeat, or a plague struck, someone had to be blamed. And an impure Vestal was the perfect, terrifyingly symbolic answer. The investigation process itself was a horrifying inversion of justice. There was no innocent until proven guilty for you. The burden of proof was effectively on the accused Vestal to demonstrate her innocence in the face of often flimsy, circumstantial evidence. Hearsay, a servant's gossip, even a strange dream could be brought before the Pontifex. You'd be called before this imposing figure, questioned relentlessly, your words scrutinized for any hint of deception or guilt. Imagine the terror of trying to defend yourself against accusations that might be pure fabrications, knowing that your composure under pressure, your ability to appear perfectly serene and pure, was your only shield. Sometimes, bizarrely, attempts were made to prove innocence through divine signs or strange ordeals. There's a famous, though likely legendary, tale of Tuccia, a Vestal accused falsely, who dramatically proved her innocence by carrying water from the Tiber in a sieve, a seemingly impossible feat supposedly granted by the goddess Vesta herself as a sign of Tuccia's purity. While a compelling story, it highlights the desperate, almost magical thinking involved. Your fate could depend on whether the gods or the Pontifex decided to provide a sign. More often, though, there were no miracles, only the cold, hard process of accusation and interrogation under immense pressure. The psychological toll of this was immense. You weren't just fighting for your life, you were fighting against a system designed to uphold the idea of your perfect purity, even if it meant destroying a real human being. This system didn't just punish the guilty. It created an environment where fear and suspicion were rampant, where the slightest misstep or perceived impropriety could lead to utter ruin. It was a constant, gnawing anxiety that lay just beneath the surface of your privileged, sacred life, a dark current always threatening to pull you under. And as the weight of accusation pressed down, the terrifying reality of Rome's judgment began to take shape, a judgment unlike any other. And then the moment arrives. It's not a formal summons with trumpets and fanfare. It's quieter, colder, a guard, or perhaps one of the senior Vestals accompanied by stern-faced men you don't recognize, but whose authority is unmistakable, comes to your cell. The air grows instantly thin, your heart doesn't just pound, it seizes in your chest, a bird trapped in a collapsing cage. You are accused, they might say, or perhaps just, come with us. The words cut deeper than any knife, because you know exactly what accused means now, what us portends. The fear, once a constant knot, explodes into a wildfire of pure, primal terror. The psychological impact is immediate, total. In an instant, your identity is stripped away. You were the revered Vestal, the guardian of Rome's hearth, a symbol of purity and divine favor. Now you are incesta, impure, defiled, a walking blight on the city. That sudden fall from grace must feel like being thrown from a great height, tumbling through the air with the ground rushing up to meet you. The respect that people showed you, the deference, the awe, it vanishes, replaced by suspicion, condemnation, disgust. Even those who believed in your innocence might now look away, afraid of being tainted by association. You are suddenly, utterly, terrifyingly alone, a pariah in the city you helped protect. Your transition from sacred priestess to condemned criminal is swift and brutal. You are physically removed from the atrium vesti, the only home you've known for perhaps decades. The familiar sounds of the courtyard, the feel of the sacred objects you tended, they are yanked away. Your beautiful, symbolic white woolen robes, the sign of your office and purity, are taken. In their place, you are dressed in the dark, somber clothing of the dead. Imagine the rough texture of the burial shroud against your skin, a cruel mockery of the fine linen you were accustomed to. This is the chilling reversal of your sacred initiation. You are being dressed for the afterlife, but you're still terribly, agonizingly alive. Now, about the punishment itself, living burial. It wasn't just a method of execution. It was a deeply symbolic act. Rome couldn't kill you in the traditional sense by shedding your blood on sacred ground, because your person was considered sacred too. Shedding your blood would pollute the very earth you were meant to protect. So they found a loophole, a way to deliver a bloodless death that appeased the gods and maintained the twisted logic of their religious law. You were effectively unmade, returned to the earth as if you had never held sacred status, buried alive in a subterranean chamber. It was meant to look, officially, like a voluntary descent into the underworld, a return to the primal Earth Mother, but there was nothing voluntary about it. The preparation for this descent is a horror show of dehumanization. You are placed in a covered litter, like a corpse being transporting for burial or perhaps forced to walk, a grim procession forming around you. The route takes you through the city streets. Imagine the sounds. The muffled cries of your family, if they dare show themselves and are allowed. The murmurs of the crowd turning to jeers or chilling silence. the rhythmic, heavy tread of the guards. You are being paraded, a spectacle of divine wrath and human failure. The air might smell of incense from a distant temple, mingling sickeningly with the everyday stench of Roman life and your own cold sweat. The small details are the worst. The jostling of the litter, the rough grip on your arm, the way your burial clothes catch on something rough, a final small indignity before the ultimate horror. Meanwhile, the man accused alongside you, if one was identified, faces a different, yet equally brutal, end. He would likely be taken to the comitium or the forum, tied to a stake, and beaten to death by the Pontifex Maximus or his representatives. His blood could be shed. His life was not sacred in the same complicated way yours was. Two bodies, two fates, both born from the same accusation, both terrifyingly public demonstrations of the consequences of violating Rome's most sacred laws. This grim procession leads you away from the familiar heart of the city, towards a place specifically designated for such an unspeakable act. A place outside the sacred boundary of Rome, a place that held its own chilling name and history. So you've been accused. The air is thick with dread. The whispers have turned into accusations loud enough for the Pontifex Maximus to hear, or perhaps convenient enough for him to listen to. You are brought before him, not in the familiar sacred space of the atrium Vesti, but likely in a more formal, intimidating setting, perhaps a public court area near the forum. This is where your fate will be sealed, not by a jury of your peers, but by one man wielding immense religious and judicial power, the weight of centuries of tradition, of Rome's deepest fears and superstitions, rests on his judgment. Imagine the scene. You stand there, perhaps with guards flanking you, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The Pontifex sits in judgment, his expression unreadable, surrounded by other priests and important Roman figures. The atmosphere is tense, silent, broken only by the occasional rustle of robes or a throat being cleared. The accusation is formally read out in cestum. The violation of your sacred vow. It's a charge that carries not just legal penalties, but divine retribution, a crime against the goddess Vesta, and by extension, against Rome itself. The evidence presented against you might be flimsy, circumstantial, or based on coerced testimony, a servant who claims to have seen something suspicious, a letter allegedly exchanged, gossip overheard in the marketplace. Remember, in this system, you are effectively guilty until proven innocent. And proving innocence against a charge this serious, leveled by figures this powerful, is almost impossible. There are no defense lawyers in the modern sense. No cross-examination designed to expose flaws in the prosecution's case. Your defense relies primarily on your own testimony. Your ability to maintain an outward appearance of perfect purity and composure under unimaginable pressure. Can you look the Pontifex in the eye and swear by the gods you are innocent? Knowing a single flicker of fear or hesitation could condemn you, this moment is the terrifying peak of the psychological ordeal. Everything you have suppressed for years, your fear, your natural desires, any secret doubts or resentments about your confined life threatens to surface, but you can't show it. Any sign of distress, Any tear, any trembling in your voice could be interpreted not as the reaction of a terrified human being, but as a sign of guilt, of impurity revealing itself. You have to be the Vestal, serene and untouchable, even as the ground beneath you is collapsing. It's a performance of a lifetime, with the highest possible stakes. And then comes the verdict. It's likely delivered formally, perhaps with a somber pronouncement. The words might be cold, clinical, detailing the finding of guilt and the mandated punishment. There's no appeal process. The pontifex's word is final. Imagine hearing those words, the sound of your condemnation echoing in the sudden, heavy silence of the chamber. The world shrinks to a single horrifying point, the realization that your life, your years of service, your identity are about to end in the most terrifying way Rome could devise. This judicial process, or lack thereof by modern standards, wasn't just about determining guilt. It was a display of power, a reinforcement of religious authority, and a necessary step before the final, public act of purification. It transformed you from a sacred figure into a convicted criminal, stripping away your divine protection and preparing you for your symbolic return to the earth. The judgment was less about evidence and more about maintaining the fragile belief system that held Rome together. A system that demanded a sacrifice when things went wrong. With the verdict delivered, the final gruesome preparations began, not for a funeral, but for a terrifying descent into the earth. A punishment reserved only for those who violated the most sacred trust in Rome. And as the weight of accusation pressed down, the terrifying reality of Rome's judgment began to take shape, a judgment unlike any other. You are gone, or rather, you are not gone in the way the Romans normally understood death. You are entombed, a living sacrifice meant to purify the city. And in the immediate aftermath of such a horrifying spectacle, a strange stillness settles over Rome. Did it work? Did the gods feel better now that the impurity was literally buried away? For the Romans, the answer had to be yes. Their faith, their civic identity, was so intertwined with the Vestal's purity and the fire's safety that they needed to believe this brutal act had restored balance, appeased Vesta, and removed the perceived divine displeasure that had manifested as bad harvests, military setbacks, or simply general unease. The execution wasn't just punishment, it was public theater, a ritualistic cleansing on a grand, terrifying scale. Think about the collective sigh of relief that must have rippled through the city's elite, the priests, the ordinary citizens. The scapegoat had been offered. The blame for whatever misfortune had befallen Rome could now be definitively placed on the fallen Vestal and her alleged partner. It reinforced the immense power of the Vestal's vow and the catastrophic consequences of breaking it, serving as a stark, unforgettable lesson for everyone watching, especially the other Vestals still living in the Atrium Vesti. Imagine the chilling effect it had on them, a cold reminder that their gilded cage was just inches away from a literal underground tomb. The weight of that fear, of seeing one of their own swallowed by the earth, must have been crushing, reinforcing their silence, their vigilance, their performance of perfect purity. But the horror didn't always end with the Vestal's living burial. The ripple effects of her crime spread outwards, often engulfing her family. An accusation of incestum against a Vestal was a profound dishonor for her entire lineage. While her male accuser might face a public beating and execution, her family often faced a slower social death. They could be ostracized, their political careers ruined, their social standing annihilated. Think of the father who gave his daughter to the service of Vesta at a tender age, believing it would bring honor and divine protection to his house. Now, that same daughter, accused and buried alive, brought only shame and ruin. There wasn't necessarily a formal legal process against the family in every case, but the social consequences, the whispers, the doors that closed in their faces, the loss of influence and respect, could be devastating and long-lasting. It was another layer of the brutal logic. The Vestal's impurity wasn't just personal. It was hereditary, a stain on her bloodline that required more than just her death to begin to cleanse in the eyes of a society obsessed with lineage and reputation. This obsession with the Vestal's virginity wasn't just about prudishness. It was tied to Rome's understanding of its own power and destiny. Vesta was the goddess of the hearth, the home, but also the hearth of the city, the symbolic heart of Rome itself. Her eternal flame represented Rome's eternal existence, and the Vestals, as her priestesses, embodied the purity and integrity of that heart. Their virginity was seen as mirroring the virginity or unconquered state of Rome itself, a city inviolate, protected by the gods. If a Vestal's vow was broken, it was seen as a cosmic breach, a mirroring of potential invasion, weakness, or corruption within Rome itself. The purity they guarded wasn't just sexual. It was civic, religious, and deeply symbolic of Rome's strength and divine favor. The gruesome punishment wasn't just to satisfy vengeance. It was a desperate, magical act to restore cosmic order and project an image of unwavering purity back onto the city itself, even if it required burying a human being alive. These events, while thankfully not an everyday occurrence, were deeply etched into the Roman consciousness. They were morality plays written in fear and earth, grim reminders of the invisible forces that Romans believed governed their world and the terrifying price of upsetting them. They weren't just stories. They were warnings, cautionary tales whispered in hushed tones, reinforcing the power of the gods, the authority of the Pontifex Maximus, and the absolute terrifying importance of upholding Rome's ancient, often brutal traditions. The earth had swallowed one of their sacred protectors, and the message was clear. Rome's purity was paramount, and its defense came at a horrifying cost. But even in that darkness, in that chilling silence after the earth was sealed, the story of the Vestals wasn't truly over. Their legacy and the unsettling nature of their role continued to shape Rome in ways both seen and unseen. Okay, we've followed the grim procession out of the city gates, past the boundary where life within Rome's protection ended. This wasn't just any piece of ground. There was a specific place designated for this horrifying ritual, often near the Colline Gate. It was called the Campus Sceleratus, literally the field of wickedness. Imagine that name. It tells you everything about how the Romans viewed this act and the person about to be buried there. This wasn't sacred ground. It was cursed ground, a place set aside for the ultimate purification ritual. You are brought to this field, a place maybe barren, may be marked by previous such events. The air here feels different, heavy with the weight of past horrors, even if the Romans preferred to think of it as a place of cleansing. A hole has been dug, leading down into a small, underground chamber. This isn't a large, elaborate tomb. It's a simple, purpose-built space, just big enough to hold a body, maybe a few feet below the surface. It's designed for one thing: to contain you while you die, slowly and alone, out of sight and out of mind, officially not executed by the state, but merely returned to the earth. A horrific piece of legal and religious sophistry. Now the descent. They might lead you to the edge, perhaps even down steps if the chamber is deep enough, or simply lower you into the opening. Imagine the feeling as you go down, the damp smell of freshly turned earth filling your nostrils, the sudden drop in temperature, the light from the world above shrinking as you descend. This is the final act of separation, severing you not just from Rome, but from the living world entirely. You are being lowered into your own grave, fully conscious. The cold, rough earth scrapes against the burial clothes they've forced you into, a final, tactile confirmation of your fate. They don't just throw you in, though. There's a twisted mockery of provision. Inside the chamber, they might place a small lamp, perhaps a loaf of bread, a jug of water, maybe even a little oil and milk. Why? Not out of mercy, oh no. This was the cruelest irony, a symbolic gesture so the state could claim you weren't technically being starved to death, but rather given the means to survive, however inadequate, before Vestal supposedly claimed you. It maintained the fiction that your death was an act of the divine, not a state execution. You are given enough provisions for a few days, maybe just enough to prolong the agony, to allow the terror to fully bloom before weakness and darkness take over. Imagine seeing that small lamp flickering in the damp, earthy darkness, knowing it's just highlighting your tomb, not offering any hope of rescue. Once you are inside, they begin sealing the opening. The sounds of shoveling earth above become terrifyingly final. Each thud of soil hitting the structure above you, or the scraping of the stone being dragged into place to cover the entrance, is another nail in your coffin. The light from the entrance dims, then vanishes completely. You are plunged into absolute darkness, a darkness so profound it feels like a physical weight pressing down on you. The air grows stale, heavy with the smell of soil and trapped breath. The sounds of the outside world fade, the distant city, the wind, the birdsong replaced by the unnerving silence of the underground, punctuated only by your own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of your heart, and the waiting begins. This is the true horror, not just the physical confinement, but the mental torment of knowing your fate is sealed, with no possibility of escape, no last-minute reprieve. Every moment is a battle against despair, against the creeping claustrophobia, against the growing certainty of a slow, agonizing death. You might try to conserve the meager provisions, but you know it's futile. The lamp will eventually burn out, plunging you into even deeper darkness. The food and water will run out, and then there is only the cold, the darkness, the silence, and the slow fading of life. This isn't a quick end. It's a process, a prolonged agony designed to emphasize the severity of your perceived crime against the gods and the state. It was Rome's ultimate punishment, a fate so terrifying it was meant to deter any thought of violating the sacred trust, a fate buried deep beneath the earth, a secret horror rarely spoken of openly but remembered with a chilling dread. The ground above you is leveled, perhaps disguised to hide the exact location. The city moves on, but for you there is only the silence, the dark, and the slow, suffocating embrace of the earth. Your story ends here, beneath the ground, a stark and horrifying testament to the price of purity in ancient Rome. But the echoes of these buried secrets didn't entirely fade. They lingered in the collective memory of Rome, shaping perceptions of power, religion, and the terrifying fragility of life under the watchful, unforgiving eyes of both men and gods. The earth above you is leveled, the specific spot perhaps intentionally forgotten by most, a grim secret buried beneath the Campus Sceleratus. The city goes on, the forum bustles, the politicians scheme, the soldiers march, and the sacred fire back in the atrium Vesti continues to burn, tended by the Vestals who remain. They are the ones left behind, living reminders that the system works, that purity was restored, and that the terror they witnessed, or perhaps only heard whispers of, is a very real possibility. The silence left by one buried life is perhaps the loudest lesson for those who survive. Yet, here is one of the great, bizarre ironies of being a Vestal virgin in ancient Rome. Despite the constant threat of a horrifying death, you also wielded a degree of power and enjoyed privileges almost unthinkable for most Roman women of your time. While your freedom was strictly defined by the walls of the atrium and the rules of your office, within those constraints, and sometimes even outside them, you held sway. You were exempt from the typical legal authority of a male guardian, tutor, a standard constraint on Roman women, regardless of their wealth or social standing. You could manage your own property, write your own will without needing a man's consent, and even give evidence in court, rights severely restricted for other women. Imagine that contrast. The woman who could be buried alive based on rumor could also hold the last will and testament of a powerful Roman senator, ensuring his wishes were carried out. Your signature on a document, your word in a legal dispute, carried immense weight, backed by the sacredness of your office. People would entrust you with precious objects, important documents, and vast sums of money for safekeeping in the atrium Vesti, seeing it as the safest, most sacred vault in Rome. You were in a strange way a bank, a notary, and a trusted confidant all rolled into one, precisely because you were set apart, untouched by the messy entanglements of marriage and family alliances that defined other women's lives. This unique status wasn't just theoretical. It had visible, tangible benefits. You had the right to ride in a chariot through the streets of Rome, a privilege usually reserved for male magistrates and priests holding specific offices. When you went out, you were preceded by a lictor, a public attendant who normally accompanied high-ranking officials, clearing the way and symbolizing your inviolable status. Anyone who dared to impede your path or insult you faced severe penalties, potentially even death. Think about that image. A woman, bound by a vow of chastity and under constant threat of death, moving through the chaotic, male-dominated streets of Rome with the symbols of state power preceding her, forcing everyone else to yield. It's a powerful, almost surreal demonstration of the paradox you embodied. They even received petitions and pleas for help, acting sometimes as mediators or advocates for those who couldn't approach male authorities directly. Your perceived closeness to the gods, your purity, gave you a moral authority that transcended typical social boundaries. You could, and sometimes did, intercede on behalf of condemned criminals on their way to execution. If you happened to encounter one and could swear they were innocent, or perhaps just took pity, they might be granted a reprieve. A woman who could be condemned to a terrifying death could, in rare instances, offer a last-minute lifeline to another condemned soul. All this power, this influence, this freedom within confinement rested precariously on one thing: your perceived, absolute, and unbroken purity. It was a power granted by the state, derived from your symbolic role, and entirely conditional on your maintaining the illusion, or the reality, of being untouched and untouchable. Your status wasn't for your own benefit, ultimately, it was for Rome's. You were a living, breathing symbol of the city's sacred integrity, and your privileges were merely the adornments of that symbol. The moment that symbol was perceived as tarnished, the power vanished, and the terrifying vulnerability that always lay beneath the surface became the only reality. This dual existence, revered yet terrified, privileged yet utterly controlled, created a unique psychological landscape for the Vestals who navigated their 30 years of service. Every day was a performance, a negotiation between the extraordinary status they held and the horrifying fate they knew awaited them if they faltered, or were accused of faltering. The buried Vestal served as a permanent, chilling reminder, a ghost haunting the marble halls and sunlit courtyards of the Atrium Vesti, a silent testament to the price of purity in a world where the sacred and the brutal were terrifyingly intertwined. And the system, in its strange, terrifying logic, persisted for centuries, leaving a legacy that speaks volumes about Rome's beliefs, its power, and the hidden costs of its perceived divine favor. The institution of the Vestal Virgins wasn't a fleeting phenomenon. It was a cornerstone of Roman religious life, an unbroken thread running through over 1,000 years of history. From the legendary founding of Rome itself, through the Republic, and deep into the Empire, the sight of these white-robed women tending the sacred fire was a constant, a symbol of continuity and divine favor in a world of flux and upheaval. They outlasted kings, emperors, and entire dynasties, their presence a testament to the deep-seated belief in their necessity for Rome's survival. But nothing, not even an institution that seemed as eternal as Rome itself, lasts forever. In 394 AD, Emperor Theodosius I, a devout Christian, made a decisive move that would extinguish the sacred flame for good. As Christianity rose to become the dominant religion of the empire, pagan cults, including the worship of Vesta, were systematically suppressed. Theodosius issued decrees that outlawed pagan sacrifices and closed temples, a direct assault on the religious foundation that had supported the Vestals for over a millennium. The Atrium Vesti, the beautiful home of the virgins, was eventually closed, the fire extinguished, the sacred objects seized or dispersed. Imagine being one of the last Vestals during this seismic shift. You've spent your entire life, perhaps 20 or 30 years dedicated to this sacred office, bound by its rules, holding its privileges. Suddenly, it's over. The vow is irrelevant in the eyes of the new power structure. Your sacred status vanishes. You are no longer a revered priestess. You are just a woman in a rapidly Christianizing world that views your former life with suspicion or disdain. What do? You are free technically, but free to do what? Rejoin a society you left as a child, which has now dramatically changed, where your unique skills, tending an ancient fire, performing forgotten rituals, are utterly useless. Some may have had families to return to, if those families were still willing or able to take them in. Others, particularly older Vestals, might have faced a lonely and uncertain future, their state pension perhaps the only thing left from a lifetime of service. It's a strange, quiet ending to a story filled with such high drama and terrifying stakes. The end of the Vestals marked the end of an era, a symbolic shift from a world where the state's prosperity was intricately linked to arcane pagan rituals and the perceived purity of a handful of women, to a world shaped by a monotheistic faith focused on different tenets and structures. The fear of divine wrath for a fire going out was replaced by new fears and new forms of religious authority. From the mists of legendary founding around 700 BC to the decree of 394 AD, this institution spanned an incredible length of time. Over 1,000 years of watchful nights, sacred duties, immense privilege, and the ever-present shadow of the Campus Sceleratus. The sheer gulf between their reality and ours is vast, measured not just in centuries, but in fundamental shifts in human belief and society. That distance, that separation, is enormous. A number like 929 years, a stark reminder of how far back these practices reach, and how alien they feel to our modern sensibilities, even as their story continues to fascinate and disturb. The Vestal virgins are gone, their fire extinguished, their unique world dissolved into the annals of history. But the questions their story raises about power, purity, fear, and the stories societies tell themselves to survive, linger. And perhaps there's still one final, unsettling thought to consider about their lasting impact. So we've walked the marble halls of the Atrium Vesti with you, felt the cold dread of accusation, and witnessed the terrifying journey to the Campus Sceleratus. We've seen the bizarre intersection of immense privilege and absolute vulnerability, the power of purity, and the horrifying price of perceived impurity in ancient Rome. The story of the Vestal virgins is more than just a historical footnote about a strange religious cult. It's a stark, unsettling look at how a society grappling with uncertainty, superstition, and the need for order can create a system built on the lives and bodies of a select few, holding them up as symbols while simultaneously holding the power to bury them alive. These women, set apart and held to an impossible standard, remind us of a chilling human tendency. The need to find a reason when things go wrong, bad harvest, plague, military defeat. It couldn't just be bad luck or poor leadership, could it? No, there must be a divine reason, a cosmic imbalance caused by human failure. And who better to embody that failure, that impurity, than the very people tasked with maintaining sacred purity? The Vestal who fell became the perfect scapegoat, absorbing the collective anxieties and fears of an entire city, her horrifying end a twisted form of public therapy, a reassertion that order was restored, the gods appeased, the city cleansed. And while we might look back at living burial with justified horror and a sense of modern superiority, it's worth pausing for a moment to consider the echoes. Do societies still create impossible standards of purity, whether moral, ideological, or personal? Do we still elevate certain figures onto pedestals, demanding they be untouched by human flaws, only to relish in their spectacular, often brutal, fall when they inevitably fail, or are accused of failing, to live up to that inhuman ideal? The methods have changed, thankfully, but the underlying pressure, the public scrutiny, the need to find someone to blame when our collective sense of order is threatened. Perhaps those instincts aren't buried quite as deep as the Vestal virgins were. The flame of Vesta is out, extinguished centuries ago. The Campus Sceleratus is now just another patch of ground in modern Rome, its grim history likely forgotten by most who walk over it. The Vestal virgins live on only in history books and cautionary tales. But their story, the chilling paradox of their lives and deaths, leaves a residue, a lingering question about the price of perfection, the power of fear, and the uncomfortable truths buried beneath the surface of even the most glorious empires. It reminds us that sometimes history's most captivating stories are not the comfortable ones, but the ones that make you wince, make you think, and stay with you long after the fire has gone out. So, what do you think? What other bizarre historical oddity or uncomfortable truth should we dig into next? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this dive into Rome's darker corners intriguing, please give the video a like and subscribe for more journeys into the strange and unsettling parts of the past. Until next time, keep questioning everything, especially the stories that seem too perfect.